I'll see you guys in the dark.
So I had just gotten out of a pretty significant relationship with someone of 4 years, nearly engaged and moving in together. When things fell apart, I took a good amount of time to be on my own and get my stuff together again. When my friends began encouraging me to get back out there. Needless to say, I really wasn't wanting anything at that point, nor looking for anything. But they insisted that I at least go out on a few casual dates, for practice at least. Just to kind of get my skills back up for when I was ready. I think they were honestly just worried because I had become quite hermetic. So I matched with this girl, who's home from college for the summer. She's a little out of the way from me, but was eager to meet. Seemed really interested, was even willing to come to my area, etc. I really wasn't all that interested, to be truthful, but my friends again encouraged this. You know, practice. A date doesn't mean commitment, whatever. I want to be very clear, though, that I was extremely honest and explicit with her that I was not looking for anything serious, or anything really at all. I was very forthcoming that I had gotten out of something serious, and I was just kind of encouraged to explore. She persisted and still wanted to meet, so we agreed to a casual lunch in a sports bar that week. I get there, and she was already waiting for me. I was a bit put off by how much different she looked from her pictures. Not trying to sound shallow or anything, but her pics from her Tinder easily had to be at least 5 years old. When I verified based on tattoo she had in person, versus the one she didn't in the pics. So I was a bit thrown off by that. I wasn't the least bit attracted to her, but I was there just to have a new experience anyways. No big deal at all. I felt so bad because the entire time she seemed so incredibly shy and awkward. I even noticed her hand shaking when she reached for her glass, which I found endearing, honestly. So I did my best to get her talking and try to help her feel more relaxed. I asked her questions and chatted about things I figured you chat about on dates. Where she grew up, music she's into, school she goes to, major, etc. All to which I literally received one-word answers. It went on like this for about an hour, and she was just not working with me at all. But I tried to keep room in my heart, because it was clear she was feeling anxious, and I understand that on a personal level. Then she pulls out this book and says, "I got this for you," and I responded very grateful, thanking her, and inquiring what it was about. Because hey, if someone wants to share a good read with me, I'm all about that. She looks at me funny, and says in a very sudden but odd tone, "You're kidding, right?" I'm very confused, and just kind of look at her like, "What?" And she says, "This is your favorite book. You told me this was your favorite book." To which I said, "No, I have never even heard of this before." So we concluded that she ultimately got me confused with someone else she must have been chatting with, which I honestly found hilarious. She was embarrassed, but I made light of it and said I found it funny, because I get it. That's Tinder culture, I guess. So as we finished lunch, and I'm still receiving one-word answers despite our funny moment, I kind of become a bit suggestive that we should conclude our date by saying I had to get back to feed my animals and do some laundry. But she became very adamant on spending more time, and asked if we could do something else. I was genuinely trying to be decent, so I agreed, and we found a nearby park to walk in. That's where shit gets weird. We sat on a park bench. Mind you, it's broad daylight. There's kids playing basketball nearby. Folks jogging passed by. I started trying making conversation yet again, but still get the one-word answers. Then out of seemingly nowhere, without any warning whatsoever, she proceeds to kiss me really aggressively, tongue and everything. I was honestly just so shocked I stood there frozen, not knowing what to do. I had this timid, shy woman who's really not made much conversation with me at all, who was all of a sudden so nervous that she was visibly shaking, just turning into a freaking bear mauling my face in like 0.6 seconds. My head was spinning with confusion and anxiety, and I swear it felt like it lasted forever, and I just prayed for it to stop. I was too put off and honestly a bit afraid to do or say anything. Like, what do you even do in that kind of situation? I was just hoping she'd pick up on my very obvious body language that I wasn't reciprocating anything at all. I was completely unprepared for a situation like this. Then some really nasty guy walks by, gawking and catcalling, and literally begins propositioning us into a three-way. And I'm just like, what the heck is going on? I need to get out of here. I was 1,000 different types of uncomfortable. I end up managing to ward him off after telling him very politely no more than several times. All the while, she's just laughing. And I'm thinking, who even are you? Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde over here? So he leaves, and I'm insisting now that I need to leave and just go home. She seems to ignore what I'm saying and gets very close to my face again and says, "Did you like that? Do you think I'm sexy? Do you want me?" When I tell you I was so freaking nervous, I was like, I really need to get home. And she was like, "Can I come with you?" I told her very firmly no. She literally tried to persuade me to let her come back to my place with me, and I had to say no more than 3 times. So finally, I'm home, and frankly, just kind of shaken up. I hadn't really done the dating thing in quite a long time, but that felt very abnormal. She then texts me after she gets home and asks me out on a second date. And I'm very kind, despite being made incredibly uncomfortable. And I told her I thought she was a very cool chick, and I had a nice time. But I did not feel anything there, and reminded her that I wasn't looking for anything. She then text-bombed me a bunch of crazy stuff, saying how she didn't understand and was so confused, that she thought I was so into her and that things went great. I did not respond to any of these, because now she's continuing to cross my boundaries. I said what I needed to say, and I thought I was being decent by at least being honest with her. So the text continued, and I figured they're going to eventually stop, because it was a first date. How can someone be so upset over someone who's not reciprocating on a first date? They did not stop, by the way. By the text, you would have thought that we just ended a 2-year relationship. Then she began calling, at which point I had to block her phone number. So Nightmare Tinder Girl, for the love of everything, let's never, ever meet again, please. I was 20 at the time, single and ready to mingle. I was studying at school about 28 minutes away from my house. And of course, I was on Tinder. Now I have dated some older men. I'm attracted to them. So my setting on Tinder for males was between the ages of 25 and 40. I swiped right on a guy who had looked decent enough, and he was 36. We matched, and he began to message me. We go through a day or two of messaging. I explained that I'm really just looking for a fuck buddy, and he had his own apartment, about a 2-minute walk from my school, which was perfect. We added each other on Snapchat, Instagram, and once he takes a look through all my pictures, his way of messaging becomes pretty strange. He starts to message me stuff on Snapchat like, "You're so beautiful. I want to hold you in my arms. You're like an angel." Now, mind you, we have never met. Once he starts messaging me like that, I realize that he's not my type, especially in a friends with benefits situation. I don't need someone like that. I start to leave him on read, and I ignore his messages. The next weekend, I was going to a wedding. I was all dressed up, and of course, I posted a few pictures on my story, which he immediately started commenting on like, "Oh my God, you're so beautiful. I miss your touch. I want to feel you in my arms." I ignore him, have a good time at the wedding, and right before the wedding started, I popped an edible. By the time I got home, it was midnight, and I was very, very high and very sleepy. I had worked earlier that day and hadn't napped in between. I got into bed and started to go through my phone. I live with my family and everyone was asleep. I started getting messages from this guy again, and I'm so high and tired that I start reading them, giving brief responses and saying, "Aw, thanks." Then he messages me saying, "I think I'm going to come to blank tonight." Blank space is the city where I live, 30 minutes away from his apartment. I respond by saying, "LOL, that's weird. Don't do that." Obviously thinking that he is joking. Then he says, "I want to breathe the same air as you. I want to feel you. I want to breathe with you." I begin to freak out, and then he starts messaging me, "Be there soon, babe." I'm like super scared at this point, because I live with my family, and I don't want anything weird happening.
Then all of a sudden, I remember that my Snap Map location is on. I go into my map, and I see my little bit emoji in her cute outfit sitting at my house. I quickly turn myself onto ghost mode. Then I see his little bit emoji, and it's getting closer and closer to my city. I somehow convince myself that he's joking. He's probably on his way to another city near mine, but he's getting closer and closer. It's now 1:30 a.m. in the morning. For the first time in years, I begin to pray. 10 minutes later, I check the Snap Map again. Now, even if you are in ghost mode, you can see if you are sharing locations with someone, although the other person can't. When I looked at my map, I was sharing location with him. He was right outside my house. I looked out my window, and there was a car with his lights on. At this point, I'm so freaked out, my heart is inside my throat. My anxiety is going through the roof, and I'm still high. I end up passing out, falling asleep. I wake up in the morning, scared. I check my phone. He had sent a few messages saying, "You have a beautiful street, a beautiful home. Have a good night, baby." I go into my mom's room to ensure that nothing has happened, and she was fine. I later went to work, and after work I went to the police station, spoke to them. They said they couldn't do anything unless he tried to come over again, and that's when I should call the police. I went home, and for a few days I got no messages. Then at 5 a.m. on the following Tuesday, I got a message. "Even though I drove all the way to your house to breathe the same air as you, you still have not messaged me. I'm not as desperate as I seem. If you ever want this D up into the balls, let me know." Since then, I've heard from him once or twice, but I eventually blocked him. I didn't block him from the start because he knew where my house was. I was scared that if he wouldn't get a hold of me, he would just show up. So, creepy asshole who showed up at my house in the middle of the night, you need to just leave me alone. I'm not interested in you anymore. So about 4 years ago, I was doing a year abroad in Switzerland as part of my degree. Just before leaving, my boyfriend and I ended our relationship, as he was off to America and myself to Switzerland. Anyway, I was quite bummed at first, and then decided it'd be fun to download Tinder. Just piss about and date meaninglessly, as I wasn't going to be there for longer than a year. So I went on quite a few dates. Some were god-awful, some were pretty decent people. I was in Geneva, so there were people from everywhere, basically. A few months in, I matched with a French guy, and we were chatting for a while. My French and his English were more or less the same level, so there were a few mild miscommunications, but nothing big. I was 20 at the time, and had my age preference set to something like 20 to 27. So I've been chatting with this French guy. I'll call him Pierre, for a couple of weeks, and he seems quite cool. He's 27, so a fair bit older, and he's a science secondary school teacher at an all-girls school. Remember this as I make it even weirder. So we went for a drink, and he buys us quite a few rounds, which is great, because it's Switzerland, and I'm a poor student. By the end of the night, I'm pretty drunk, and I remember making out with him, then getting dropped back to my student accommodation by Pierre. He had been drinking soft drinks after the first. Anyway, I see him a couple other times after this, and he's always pushing the alcohol when we're together. One evening, I slept over as it was late for me to get back, and I wake up in the morning, and he's taken off my bra while I was asleep. He was wide awake, rubbing my back, and staring at me. I hadn't slept with him either. It's just been making out so far. Then he told me his mom was coming to visit, and did I want to meet her. I probably only met this guy 3 times. I decided that I was done with this weirdo, so when I left, I was planning on what to say to get rid of him. Anyway, back home later, I got a text that said something in broken English like, "We slept beautifully," and I just left it on read. Later that evening, I got a call from him, but I just let it go to voicemail. When I listened to it, he sounded really upset, and said that he had to confess something to me because he was falling in love with me, and needed to be honest. He revealed that he'd lied about his age. This reminded me of that episode in Friends where Monica accidentally slept with a high school student, thinking he was in his 20s. This guy looked quite young, so I thought he'd lied and was younger than 27. He's actually 35. I know that's not particularly old, but to date a 20-year-old knowing she thinks you're young, I find that kind of weird. I blocked him on Facebook and on my phone. Just sort of got on with the last week of term. He turned up at the reception desk one day, having known where I lived because he dropped me home that one time. The receptionist asked him to leave and informed me as he got quite insistent, so they just warned me. I didn't hear from him again after this, which was good, and I was flying back to the UK in a week for the Christmas holidays. During the holidays, I got a random Facebook friend request from a pretty legitimate-looking profile, so I accepted it just in case I knew them. It was a bad idea. I got a huge essay from Pierre saying I tracked your flight all the way back home to check that you made sure you got home. Okay, pretty creepy. I blocked this other profile and got a message request from another profile about a week later, saying that he had checked flights from Bristol to Geneva online and decided that I would have chosen the cheaper one closer to term, so he will meet me and we can chat. Now, I don't know if he just turned up at the airport every time a flight from Bristol came in. There are about 2 or 3 a day. But yeah, when I land, I didn't think that he would be there, because who would be able to guess the exact flight that I was on? The minute I come through the gates, I can see him holding a sign with my name on and some flowers. Luckily, he was distracted at the time, so I managed to slip by and get on the train into the city. My friend was already back, so I told her to meet me, and then went to the police station because this guy was pretty weird. Didn't have any trouble with him after this, as he probably found someone else to obsess over. But again, he's a teacher. To girls from the ages of 11 to 18, so gross. Anyway, Pierre, I hope you're not hanging around the airport anymore.
So this happened today. Against my better judgment at the beginning of the month, I got Tinder. I matched with a few guys, etc. One of them is James. We ended up texting each other, and he seemed pretty chill, and pretty into me. He's a decent-looking guy, and we seemed to click. He had apparently been in a relatively abusive relationship with a woman, and he was looking to start over. According to him, she had hit him with a frying pan and pepper sprayed him once. He kept going on about how crazy she was. All right, this stuff happens. We went out to the movies this past Friday. I had a great time. We ended up talking for a few hours, and we hit it off pretty well. I asked about the ex because I was a bit curious as to why he'd stay with someone like that. He didn't say anything positive about her, just that she was crazy, had mental illness, and didn't take her meds. That kind of stuff. She had tried to baby trap him just to have a miscarriage. He expressed relief that he didn't end up with a kid. He said he had felt obligated to her. Again, I get that. All in all, I had a good time though. This morning rolls around, and he tells me that he had hooked up with his ex last night, and that he was going to try and work things out with her. Mildly insulting that I lost out to an abusive chick, but whatever. I tell him that it's cool. He then a few hours later texted me to say that she was crazy, and he thought she was changing, but she wasn't, blah blah blah. He kept asking if he could see me. He was being very pushy about wanting to see me today. He begged for 5 minutes of my time, so he could explain to me. I politely told him that I didn't want to be involved with someone who was so clearly hung up with his ex. This is where it gets nuts. He admitted he still was, but that he wanted to see me today so I could meet her, and she could determine if I was better for him than she was, and that she wanted him to be happy because he and I had a connection. I flipped after that. Told him that the fact he needed his ex to determine who was right for him was absolutely nuts, and that it is not what love is, and that I wanted no part of it. His ex started texting me after that, and it was nonstop insults and incoherent stuff that made no sense. He also dropped the bomb that she was his wife. I told her to screw off, basically, and blocked the number. I went on Tinder to message him where I called him a piece of crap, and he was intelligent, he would leave her and never message me again. He started to harass me, saying that I was miserable because they have a beautiful love together, and all this crazy shit. He then went on to say my wife knows where you work. I hope she doesn't do anything rash. And I told him that if that was a threat, I would gladly go to the police. He then said she's been to jail before, she's not afraid, and that she loves him so much she'd screw anyone up and risk jail for him, and that she'd kill my friends if they tried to protect me, and she's armed and dangerous. I told him goodbye, reported him, and deleted my Tinder account. I did go to the police that night, but since it wasn't a direct threat, they can't do much. The cops think that James was more or less full of shit and was trying to scare me, since some people love getting off on that. He said I did the right thing by blocking him and reporting him, and said I should keep my eyes open and alert the people at my job. Scary thing is, James seemed perfectly normal, but he lied about being married, how he felt towards his wife, and he flipped like a switch. His excuse for not being upfront about being married was that they were going to get a divorce. He seemed so docile and assuming, and the hatred and aggressive attitude was insane. I have to honestly wonder what would have happened had I gone to talk for 5 minutes. I'm kinda concerned since they do know where I work. But if either of them try anything, then the cops can actually nail them. What a weekend, huh?
Three or 4 years ago, I decided to check out Tinder and see what it was all about, thinking, what the hell, and that I had nothing else to lose. I quickly made a profile, and after an hour or so of checking out the app and how to use it, I matched with a guy in my area, and we just started talking. We spent most of that afternoon exchanging messages and chatting, asking questions, getting to know one another. By late afternoon, he had given me his cell phone number, and we took the messages away from Tinder and started texting. After a few days, everything was normal, and we were having nice chats daily. Naively, I thought this was pretty cool, to match with someone so nice, and that had similar interests on my first go using Tinder. Boy, was I wrong. On the fourth day of us texting back and forth, his tone shifts, and he starts asking really odd questions, some of them pretty sexual, some of them not. There had been flirting between us, and a few double entendres, something like what he started asking. A lot of his questions were really sexually specific. I quickly nipped this in the bud, and told him that I was uncomfortable. He apologized for this, and accepted how I was feeling. We proceed from there. I'll bet a lot more continually on that part. I didn't have a lot of dating experience at the age of 20, and as this was my first time using Tinder and online dating, I thought this was normal behavior. However, I knew not to ignore the odd feeling I had in the pit of my stomach. When he asked if I'd like to meet up for a coffee a couple of days later, I accepted somewhat reluctantly. I knew enough about this sort of stuff to make sure to tell people I was going out, who with, and where we were going in case anything had happened. After we agreed on a local coffee shop, the tone turned again, and he started making all these assumptions, and I had to tell him several times that no, I would not sleep with him right away. The final straw came when he started texting, saying that he would run away together, and that he was going to take me away, and we could elope. Just as I'm formulating a text to send back to him in reply to the "I want to whisk you away" message, my phone pings, and I get a message from him telling me that he has rope and duct tape in the back of his car, ready for us to use. I noped out of there real quickly. I stopped replying to his messages, blocked him, then reported his profile through Tinder. I wasn't sure what else to do about the situation aside from that, but I made sure that anyone I knew who was using Tinder, I told them about this guy, so if he came up, they knew not to match with him. So guy with the rope and duct tape in the back of his car who wants to take a girl away. That was pretty creepy, and I hope you don't try that on another woman. So, some context. I have never really been in a long-term relationship. I've dated a girl for a little bit, but I haven't dated a guy. I'm bi. And I've never slept with either a girl or a guy. Like anyone else my age, 21 and female, might do, I start sweeping on Tinder to try and put myself out there. I like to think that I'm not naive and pretty intuitive. I wasn't perceptive about this guy at all. Jake and I swiped and matched each other 2 days ago. Jake's first message telling me he wanted to meet me and my dog. He thought that we were both cute. Liking his directness, I said that we should meet up. The night, the first red flag waved. When I didn't answer him back immediately, he messaged me, asking if he was detecting negativity, chalking up to nervousness. I apologized, explained why I didn't answer, and all was good. We then planned to meet up last night at a bar. Flag number 2 was waved when I arrived at the bar. It's important to note, in the state that I live in, any place selling liquor can't let in someone under 21. I didn't know this, and had been reassured by Jake that I would get in no problem. Of course, this wasn't true. Luckily, in retrospect, unfortunately, seeing my birthday was in just a week, the bouncer let me in anyways. Within minutes, Jake was at the bar too. Meeting this guy, he seemed pretty normal. Red leather jacket, chucks, typical normal dude. He ordered me a gin and tonic, and one for himself. We settled in to talk. He tells me about his life. He's rich, and his family, and I do the same. We play pool at one point, so I put my drink down. This is when things get a little blurry. I can't remember most of our conversation up until we happened to get back to my place. I remember us leaving, us getting in his car, and us getting back to near my place. You have to understand, I don't drink very much, but one drink does not get me drunk. I don't get hangovers. I barely ever brown out, and I never black out. This is important to notice. Once in my town, we decided to go to a nearby market to pick up food. As we are there, red flag 3 occurs. Seeing someone I thought that I knew, I told Jake that I was going to go say hi. He awkwardly backed away and stood outside at his point, refusing to go meet her. I was wrong, though. I didn't know the girl, and soon rejoined him to walk to my place. As we open the door to my place, my roommate Maddie opens the door. We say hi, talk a little bit, and she mentions that she's about to take a shower. Jake at this point creepily makes a "oh" sound. Maddie, who is also tipsy at this point, mentions some guy she wants to have sex with. No biggie, it's the way that she rolls. But after his expression and the realization of how tired I was and how drunk, I say that he should go. He does with no attempt at any physical context. This is where the story should end, but it doesn't. Within minutes, this dude blows up my phone with messages, saying he is more open-minded, like my roommate, calling me boring, implying that I am not attracted to guys, saying that he felt no chemistry, and he hoped that we would have cuddled. Show my roommate, who gasps. She's not getting the full meaning of the open-minded comment. Remember, drunk. I ask why she's so shocked. Finally, I get it. He's implying that he wants to sleep with her. That he's more open to sex than I am. Creepy. Definitely creepy. At this point, I'm freaking out. Slowly, I realize I'm acting and feeling, putting together how one drink shouldn't make me feel this way. I realize I might have been drugged. Maddie and I go to the local police. We report it. I decide not to get tested. I could explain why, but until you're in my position, possibly drugged at 3 a.m., embarrassed, worried that you're wrong, worried that you might be charged for underage drinking, don't judge me. It's a lot harder than it looks to go through the whole process. Anyway, the story ends like this. He's blocked. I'm terrified because he knows where I live, and with me sleeping off whatever's in my body. Jake from Tinder, you need to stop drugging girls. Also, stop creeping on people's roommates. It's definitely gross. This all happened when I was 19. I'm not the best looking dude, so I've never had much luck with women, and I ended up on Tinder. I wasn't having much luck there either until the 3rd month of using it, when a blonde woman named Katie messaged me. She was pretty enough that I just dismissed her as a bot. It wasn't until 3 days later that she messaged me again, which was odd because bots almost never do it more than once. I clicked on her chat and replied, then looked at her profile. What I saw was pretty generic, but definitely wasn't a bot's profile. We had been talking for like a month when she proposed the idea that I come see her. I was pretty reluctant as she lived nearly 8 hours from me by car. I had to admit, I really did like her quite a bit, and I had been thinking about asking her if I could come see her for a while. After a bit more badgering from her, I finally said I would take the drive to go see her. At this point, I had no reason to doubt she was who she said she was. She had video chatted every other week and called most days. I just assumed I got really lucky. Things did get a little weird on the way there, though. She kept messaging me, asking me where I was, and making sure I was still coming. At some points, when I took more than 30 minutes to respond, she sends me a slew of annoyed texts. Admittedly, I had chalked this all up to her being nervous about me coming to see her. I was pretty nervous too, so I couldn't blame her. I had a hard time finding the house at first. The directions she gave me were pretty confusing, and it was back through a series of gravel and dirt roads, and a large thicket of trees. It was still about midday when I came onto the old-looking house. A window on the second floor was boarded up, but it didn't look abandoned, just worse for wear. Katie's red buggy that she liked to talk about was parked in front of the garage. My phone and texted her that I was here. She only sent a smiley face in return. When I got out of the car to go knock on the door, I noticed someone was looking at me from one of the second floor windows. I found it a little creepy, but figured it was just her father or something. She had told me that she comes to stay with her every now and again, so I just ignored it. Knocked on her door. She answered with a smile and even gave me a kiss, which surprised me, and I followed her inside. We sat down on her couch and started talking about our plans when I asked her about her dad. "Tell me that your dad was here," I said. Was that I was going to be surprised or not? Katie looked confused and told me that her dad wasn't here. I still thought she was keeping up the act, and I told her that she didn't have to keep pretending, and that I had seen him looking at me through the upstairs window. Katie went pale and said that she had out of there now. Ran out to our cars, and when I questioned Katie, she informed me that her dad wasn't there, and that she had been home alone until I showed up. I called the police, and while I was on the phone giving the address, Katie gasped and pointed to the window where I had seen the guy last. He was looking at us from out the window again. I got a better look of him, and he seemed much older and frail, like he hadn't eaten anything in a while. He left the window after he saw that we saw him. The police took half an hour to show up, and the whole time, Katie was just crying and mumbling about how she was an idiot for not keeping her doors locked. When the police finally did show up, one started asking me and Katie questions, and the other two searched the house. They came back out a little later and told me and Katie that while they did not find anyone, they did find that the back door was hanging open. Whoever it was had run out into the woods, but the cops were sure the house was empty now. After the cops left, Katie asked me to stay the night because she was too scared to be in her house alone. I gladly did, and we slept downstairs on the couch, as Katie's bed was the next room next to the one the man had been in. Katie had also brought out the shotgun that her father had given her, but she never used. I told her it was fine, the man's gone, but she just insisted, saying she'd feel safer if we had it out. I'm glad she did. Later that night, I was still wide awake, watching some TV. Katie had somehow managed to fall asleep. In the kitchen, I heard the sound of a doorknob being turned. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was just pissed off. I flipped on the light in the kitchen and pointed the gun at the kitchen door, and there he was. The guy that had been in the house before was standing on the other side of the glass door. He looked shocked, and I'm glad we had the door locked. The man unfroze and yet again ran into the woods. I woke up Katie and told her what happened, called the police yet again. When they arrived, they did a sweep of the woods and found no one yet again. They told Katie and me that it'd probably be a good idea to stay somewhere else for the night. Katie and I said our goodbyes. She was going to stay at her friend's house, and I was just going home. I left a little after Katie did. I was on the phone with my brother telling him about what happened. My headlights were on. As I was talking, something caught my eye. That fucking man was standing at the corner of the house, just watching me. I gunned it out of there and didn't even bother calling the police again. But I did text Katie, and she said she was going to call them again. I don't think that Katie ever went back to that house alone.
I met a guy on Tinder, and we really started to hit it off. We'd been chatting for a few weeks, and even discovered we had a few mutual friends. I was pretty intoxicated one night, and was feeling social, and decided to call an Uber to get to his place. Once I got there, we talked outside for a while, and ended up vibing even better in person. I opened up to him about my health problems, and he opened up to me about his older sister who had passed away from a similar condition to mine. I was curious about his sister, but I definitely didn't want to pry. We walked into his house,
and it smelled like 1,000 dead rats were rotting under the floorboard. I was still pretty drunk, so I tried to forgive it because, hey, sometimes animals die under a house or in the walls, and there's nothing you can really do about it. I start to look around, and the whole house looks like a cluttered storage unit. He takes me to his room, which is seemingly normal, and we hook up. I ended up falling asleep there and woke up around 10 a.m. to the stench of death. I opened my eyes, feeling very sober, and started to look around the room. I noticed that only girls' clothes were hung in his closet. I start to assume I've probably been cheated with. Then I see a giant black binder on his nightstand. When he woke up, I decided to jokingly ask him, "What's in that giant binder?" Turns out, it was every single episode of Golden Girls printed out. He said he read it at work, and it's the only show he'll ever watch. Okay. I asked him what he did for work, something I definitely should have known by this point, and he dodged the question. I sat up and looked at the pillow I'd cozily slept on. It had no pillowcase and was covered in what looked like old blood. It looked like the blood had been coughed onto. I started putting the unpleasant pieces together. I asked as sensitively as I could, "Hey, was this your sister's room? I noticed the clothes in the closet." He said, "Yeah, and this is her bed. I haven't changed or washed anything. It just makes me feel better to be in her bed. This is actually where I held her when she died, and you remind me so much of her. I really, really like you," and then casually tried to hook up with me, like he didn't just drop unsettling AF news. I felt immensely sorry for him, but needed to get out of there. I made an excuse and left. I decided to not entirely ghost him because of how bad I felt for him. He was clearly dealing with some really dark shit. We kept in contact for a few weeks, until I went on my Find My Friends app and noticed that he had clearly taken my phone while I was asleep that night and shared my location with himself. I called him and went off. This was not my first rodeo with a stalker type, and I was not dealing with it. He told me he couldn't believe I thought he would do that, and that I'm being a really terrible person, dumping him because his cat had recently died. I blocked him. After he said that about his cat, combined with his tendency to hold on to things, it really makes me wonder what that smell actually was. Let's hope not. And though I hope he gets help, let's not meet again. So I downloaded Tinder when I was 18, and being single in a big city, I ended up going on a lot of fun dates. One guy really caught my attention, because, well, he was really attractive. We chatted a bit, and I felt pretty into him, so I decided that I would go meet for coffee. He was sweet and charming, and we had a great conversation about school, art, and music. We found out that we were both musicians, and the date was going so well that I agreed to walk the few blocks back to his house so that we could play some music for me. I was new to online dating and was still fairly naive, so I followed him into his weird converted garage bedroom and sat down on the couch while he pulled out his keyboard. He played for a little while, and I started getting a little antsy. He was super into the music and kind of getting aggressive with the keyboard. He was slamming keys down, making these weird noises, so I shot up out of my seat and told him that I should get going soon. He totally went back to normal. His tone changed, and his posture became less hunchbacked. So when he apologized for getting carried away, I agreed to sit back down on the couch so that we could talk some more. He came and sat down next to me. We went back to our earlier conversation. He seemed back to normal and nice. So when he asked if he could kiss me, I agreed. He leaned in towards me, and I closed my eyes waiting. And I waited, but I didn't feel his lips. So I opened my eyes a peek and saw him just staring at me. I threw my head back surprised, but he had snaked his hand back towards my hair and interwoven his fingers so that I couldn't move. He then inhaled deeply and told me that you smell like you're Jewish. I can tell because you smell like my aunt's house. I was totally freaked out at this point, partially because, yes, I am Jewish, and tried to wiggle away from him frantically, stating that I had to go. He then jumped on top of me, and to my horror, started sobbing, yelling that he's so sorry that he made me feel uncomfortable. His body weight was completely preventing me from moving, so I forced myself to rub his back. I told him that I wasn't uncomfortable at all, and that he was really sweet. He made me promise over and over again that I'd see him again before finally getting up. I moved to the door and tried calmly to tell him that I really needed to go. He was blocking my way, and all I could think of was that I needed him to let me leave. I couldn't fight him off. He told me that I needed to kiss him before I could leave, and I quickly pecked him on the lips. He smiled at me, and I was glad that he didn't expect more. "Call me, please. I think that went well," he told me, as he opened up the garage door, and I scurried out. I called my mom and started crying as soon as I was far enough away. She called me a cab home, and I blocked him from every way that he had contact. I saw him once after that on campus, and that was enough for me. So I hope that we never meet again. Okay, so that I'll add some extra info that I've been asked. We very loosely had mutual friends. He was friends with my old roommate, who I no longer was in contact with for very different reasons. I found out that after he knew her because he sold her drugs. I did in fact contact the police. This did happen when I was 18. I'm now 22. Nothing more came out of this. He did share that he had really bad anxiety. However, I was not aware that he was self-medicating with drugs, which were probably the cause of this incident. Last I heard, he was in another state growing weed, and hasn't tried to contact me in almost 2 years.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.